to you our panelist, Ed Weber. Ed has served as director of the Hub since 2014. He graduated from Lancaster Bible College with a bachelor's degree in missions and has more than 25 years of youth and young adult ministry experience. Since becoming director of the Hub, Ed has expanded the impact of the campus cupboard, launched weekly community events like Game Night and French Toast Friday, established 2 weekly free lunch programs, and coordinated Millersville University campus ministers through the One Millersville initiative. Under his leadership, the Hub has become a true partner to Millersville University community, working with wellness directors within student affairs and enrollment management to serve the needs of students. Ed and his wife, Vicki, have 5 children and are proud residents of the Penn Manor School District. So welcome, Ed. What have you noticed in the past year?
I'll highlight a very specific thing I've noticed, and that is back in the spring, a lot of people lost work. A lot of university employees were furloughed, let go. And actually, there were quite a few students who lost their student job, whether it was work study or just students who work for the university in a variety of capacities. What happened was now you have students who were used to that paycheck that now don't have that paycheck. And I do see what David highlighted, which is I think a lot of students went home. I know here in the spring, there was a great deal of uncertainty, maybe a little more fear then than now that we're kind of getting a handle on the pandemic, maybe with vaccines and treatments. But in the spring, a lot of students just opted to just go home. And when you go home and you go home to a family that has resources, your food security needs are going to be met probably a little bit better than here. But for those students that stayed, especially off campus in apartments, renting from landlords here in Millersville, if they were in that situation and they lost their job on campus, I found that they were probably at a much greater risk for food insecurity. So that's the one thing I would say I've noticed in the past year.
Yeah, thank you. That's a real reality for sure. So thank you for sharing that. And our last but not least, our panelist, another one of my friends, Dr. Karen Rice. She joined the School of Social Work at Millersville University in 2006. She's now an associate professor, department chairperson, and DSW co-director. She's also the co-chair for Governor Wolf's Poverty Reduction Action Team. She's an alumnus of Millersville University, where she earned her undergraduate degree in psychology. Dr. Rice later earned her master's of social work from Temple and PhD from the University of Maryland, Baltimore. A licensed social worker in Pennsylvania, Dr. Rice has practiced in the areas of child welfare and adult and juvenile mental health and sexual perpetration. She was a trainer for the Pennsylvania Child Welfare Resource Center, where she trained child welfare workers and assisted with the development of curriculum related to the investigation of child abuse and neglect and working with families with substance abuse issues. Dr. Rice serves on a number of boards. She's a very busy lady, locally and internationally, lending her knowledge and skills related to program development and evaluation, diversity and inclusion, and global citizenry. These boards include the Lancaster County Children and Youth Social Service Agency, the International Consortium for Social Development, the Council on Social Work Education's Commission on Educational Policy, Integrated Studies Advisory Council, Closing the Gap, and Diversity, Inclusion, and Racial Healing, Lancaster County. So very busy lady. Welcome, Dr. Rice.
Thank you, Miriam. And I also want to echo what Jan said. It's an honor to be on this panel with my colleagues. I believe we'll have time to talk further after the documentary about some of the specifics related to Millersville to respond to David's questions. So I want to just comment on one thing and that I think over the past year, we've all seen cars lining up at the food pantries. And I think over the past year, what I've noticed is that the pandemic has made food insecurity visible within this country, that hunger has existed, but as a result of the pandemic, it's now visible. And again, to go back to the cars that we saw lining up, and then of course the media highlighting those incidences. As a result, the pandemic, of course, made the food insecurity worse, and also no individual is immune to food insecurity. So parents, grandparents, students, those with jobs, those without jobs, all have been affected with food insecurity, as well as geographic locations. So you can be, you don't have to be in poverty to be food insecure. And so I think that that's what has been highlighted and exacerbated over this past year.
Mhm. It's a great point. It's cut across so many different areas and people, and I appreciate what you said about it being visible. I think that that's where I see perhaps some hope that people are really recognizing we need to do something about this and can't go back to the way we were then. So, well, thank you all. So I'm going to turn it back over to Shana. First, I just want to, thank like Soledad O'Brien and all the folks who made that possible, and also sincerely thank, Eve and Isabella and Joey and Shaquara that shared their stories with us. That's pretty powerful. So I'd like to ask the panelists to turn on their cameras, and I just want to, because I'm so moved by that, before we jump into the other questions, I just want to offer a space for you to comment on anything in the film that that struck you. So Karen, do you have anything you want to say? You can always pass too if there's nothing you really want to say now, but.
I'm always, moved by the personal stories. I think the power of the story helps not only illuminate the challenges, but it connects us to the challenges, but also connects us as individuals, as humans. And so, I'm always moved and humbled that people are willing to share.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have a thought you want to share?
I have something to, I think what struck me is Shaquara's story. It really struck me the impact of family on when you're dealing with when you're dealing with any kind of challenges, especially homelessness, food insecurity. I think one of the profound things I'm discovering here at the hub and at the campus cupboard in Millersville is the connection between community and meeting needs. And I think in those stories, just seeing, if you have a group, whether it's ROTC or you're involved in a club or anything like that, it makes a big impact to have a circle of support. So I know we're talking specifically about addressing food security, but I really felt for Shaquara because she had so little communal support starting in the home. So that's something stood out to me.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. It's insightful. David or Jan, anything you want to comment on?
I would just say, and I imagine most folks here agree with this, that these stories are, it's better now than I think a few years back, but I think that these stories are not on the radar, right, of policymakers. I think most folks, when they are confronted with these stories, if they have not worked on a college campus, if they haven't been a student like this, right, they're shocked by this. They don't believe it, really. And you heard Dr. Goldrick-Rab in the beginning talking about how when she first started to do this research, met with incredible skepticism, right? Oh, this can't be real, right? And still is, right? But less so now, right? We've all been putting a spotlight on this. But still, I think these are stories that people do need to hear, and many people still don't believe, and we need to keep telling them.
Yeah, and that's why I think this is just such an important, documentary and discussion for tonight. So, Jan.
I think what continues to strike me and upset me is the fact that there seems to be this expectation that the person that's experiencing this insecurity related to food and poverty and so many other issues that are contributing to what they're going through, that they're expected to like figure it out themselves. Like, it was very stark to me throughout the documentary that there were times where people would talk about doing a happy dance in somebody's graduation, well-meaning, because you want them to be forward thinking while they're sitting there in front of you starving. And with so much stress, Shakara, particularly, as Ed brought up, so many extenuating things that no one had any idea were going on. Being responsible for the well-being of her father and keeping shelter over their head and trying to go to school and, all those pressures. I think every one of the young people featured talked about the stress and the pressure, wanting to be in school, but yet that alone and the debt, and like Joey in particular talked about that, and being overwhelmed by that and overwhelmed by other people's expectations for what you should do or what you will do. And I think that a college student today is very different in terms of those kinds of things. You have a lot more college students who are working to send money home or to help their families survive. And then they're trying to be here and deal with all of the things that go on as a college student, and not being able to have any kind of freedom to explore in completeness the opportunities that college can bring, because they're so worried about all the other things. And then so many students go to college, not necessarily because they want to study, but because it's a roof over their head and a meal plan. And then when they get here, they realize the substantial debt that will incur just to eat and have a roof over their head for so many years, and I know for me, that was a big thing when I went to college. So I just think that we're not looking, we don't want to see, I don't know, but we're not asking the right questions, and the stigma is so huge. It's a stigma in our society, period, to ask for help of any kind, let alone if you're food insecure or homeless or facing other challenges.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, and I think I would like to start with maybe some of the causes and then move towards some of the solutions, right? So we can brainstorm a little bit. So, for example, in the film, they named a couple of causes of homelessness or this food insecurity. And they talked about, we're really thankful for the food pantries that we have, but, over and over again, they're like, that's not enough, right? So I guess I would like to ask the panel, what do you consider to be some of the causes that are most prominent from your perspectives?
I'll just jump right in and say, I do think there's a lot to explore with the cost of meal plans on campus. And I don't want to get, I'm not trying to be too provocative or anything, but it is very common to hear this from students. As soon as I can get off campus, I'm going to move off campus because I can save a lot of money by not having the meal plan. And the reality of it is, I don't know how I imagine it's like this at many institutions. If you live in the residence halls, you have to have a meal plan. And a lot of students are like, I'm going to get the cheapest one I can. And it really comes down to, I'm sure the food is excellent. I'm sure the quality is through the roof, but it's simply, there are cheaper options. And there are cheaper, healthier options. Just as healthy. It's not, when the girl was talking about the $7 sandwich, I'm thinking here at Millersville at our eateries that you can go to, and I'm like, yeah, there's great food options, but it's expensive. And if you can't buy $7 sandwiches 2-3 times a day. So I feel like somehow trying to address the business side of it to make it more affordable, that would probably keep some students from coming to our cupboard if they had more affordable meal options.
I know we're going to get to solutions, so I don't want to talk about the solutions. I tend to be solution oriented, but I think when you think about the problem, right? And I know it sounds so simplistic, is just give people increase their wages, but in reality, when we talk about moving someone out of poverty, and again, people can not be in poverty and be food insecure, but to move someone out of poverty, the pathway out of poverty, research tells us, is education and a livable wage, right? And so the challenges that we're experiencing with the food insecurity is due to the fact that our wages have not been increasing over time to provide us with a livable wage in order to meet our essential needs. And so there's been increases in the cost of housing, increases in the cost of transportation. We're more transient today than we were previously, right? We're not living where we're working. And so there's longer commutes, and that's increase in transportation costs, childcare costs, educational costs. The documentary highlights the cost of education, on and on. And that as a result of those increase in essentials and the lack of increase in the livable wage has resulted in individuals needing to make decisions of where they can ration, right? Ration their money. Where can I give up something in order to pay the essentials that I must pay in order to get by day to day? And so what we're seeing is individuals are needing to make decisions about the types of food that they purchase. So as Ed described, we often see a decrease in the quality of the food that gets purchased when we are needing to figure out how do we ration our income, right? And so we're purchasing the lower quality food, non-nutritious food, which then has other implications such as healthcare challenges. But then that's where individuals need to rely on the food banks and the pantries that Ed offers to our college students, and that's offered around our community, because people are needing to make decisions of what they can give up in order to survive.
Mhm. Thank you. That really rings true. David, did you want to chime in?
Sure. It touches on some things that were said and that were addressed in the film. I think in general, right, not Millersville in particular, but higher ed is still viewing their students the same way they viewed them 50 years ago, right, in some ways. And we have a saying at the Hope Center, we need to educate the students that we have, not the ones we wish we had or the ones we used to have, right? And that's why and you heard it in the film, we use the term real college student, right? That these are not outliers. These are not a small minority of students who are struggling in these ways, right? This is increasingly, a large portion, if not a majority of all students who are trying to pursue a degree have these issues. So I think it's a mindset. That's one root cause. The economics, Ed, you touched on the food service, and it's and it's touched on in the film. When I first started doing this kind of work in higher ed, I immediately went to, pointing out the food service as the villain in some of this stuff. And it isn't that simple. I think what we see in Pennsylvania in particular, and Millersville is a part of the PASHE system, right? The 14 schools. You all know, right, that state support for the PASHE system has not kept up, right, with costs, with inflation. I think levels of support for the schools are lower than they were pre 2008 recession than they are now. They haven't come back up. And this means that tuition's gone up 33% in the last 10 years in general across the PASHE schools. And so where do schools make up this money? In addition to tuition, they make it up through things like the meal plans, right? They have to figure out how to survive in some ways, the schools, by other revenue sources, and the meal plans become one of those, and that's touched on in the film. And so all the pressures trickle down to this, to the students in terms of costs. I think that's certainly something to be looked at. And then lastly, I would just say that the survey we did last year in the fall, asking students about their work situation, this touches on Karen's point around wages. 61% of students across the country said they lost their job, they lost their hours got cut, or their pay got cut during the pandemic. So clearly, if they were supporting themselves like the students in the film, right, they were even less able to do so during the pandemic.
Yes, thank you. And, I picked up on, I think this was done in 2019. So this is, these situations were real then. And I agree with you that we are seeing it really be exacerbated right now. So, great. So there are some serious problems, and we can see, like my husband says, everything's connected, right? You start talking about it and it's like all these things kind of factor together. And, I guess I'm curious as to, one other question before we get to what are the solutions to it, but what gets in the way of making permanent change with regard to this issue? What are the barriers that we have to really address to take down those walls so that we can make permanent change? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Okay. I'll try, at least from my limited. So I think that from my own experience in college, when I experienced food insecurity and homelessness, it was more about somebody not really understanding what was going on, me feeling much shame about it. And even working jobs, I couldn't afford any of it, the meal plan. I couldn't afford the residence hall, any of it. And so at that point, you don't know who to talk to, you don't know who to tell. And a lot of people will just overlook very obvious signs that you're not eating. You do fall asleep in class. And, I was losing a lot of weight, and I was sick a lot. And, it was hard to work all those jobs without having food. And you get embarrassed. You make up stories about where you're going, or, people want to give you a ride home and you don't really have a home to go to. And the other thing is, it's not just about the food. There's deeper issues that are going on. There were deeper reasons why I wasn't able to access food. And you have to get to the heart of those. While a food pantry like Ed would have been my savior back then, I would have probably slept on Ed's doorstep and been there every day. If I had known that nothing like that existed at that time. But even now that it does, there are still students that feel like they can't go there. And Ed is very welcoming. I mean, I can't speak enough about that. But there's still a lot of shame with it. And there's still a lot of individuals who are experiencing trauma and different things that are going on in their life that it doesn't allow them to go for help. You know what I mean? It stops them. That alone is a huge barrier. And expectations, pressure,
Miriam, I'd just add to that, just going with everything Jan just said, our culture is all about individualism, and you can do it and you don't need help. Be your own person. You can take care of this yourself. You don't need anybody else. And unfortunately, I think that can be a negative when you're a student and you're just trying to solve the problems on your own. You have this sense of pride, and that's good. I mean, you need to have that kind of self-confidence and self-reliance, but with some of these things, you have to reach out. And if you don't reach out, not everyone's going to pick up, not everyone's going to track you down or pursue you to find out what's going on. So I really resonate with Jan's story, because I feel like a lot of students out there, there is still a stigma. There is a sense of shame. There's a sense of pride. And culture kind of feeds into that. You can be self-reliant. You don't need anybody.
To build off of what Ed said, when we have a perception in our society that it's the individual's responsibility to meet their own needs, or that there is systems in place to meet your needs, and we don't see the systemic barriers that are in place that are preventing individuals from meeting those needs, those attitudes, right, help shape policy. And so if we have this perception that it's an individual's responsibility, then we're not going to look at the need to change policy to help individuals who are food insecure.
Great point. Yeah, one of the points at the end of the film where the one woman talked about policies and practices, you know, like you have to go to the core. And if you're really going to address this, I think we need to pull down some of those systemic barriers that are in place already. So yeah, good point. So you mentioned stigma. You know, how do we reduce the stigma around food insecurity? I mean, you know, in some ways, I think maybe this pandemic has moved the needle on that one a little bit, right? Because like you said, it's cut across so many different, it's not just people that we think are homeless that are food insecure. It's cut across so many different demographics right now. But how do we try to remove that stigma?
I mean, all I can do is speak to, on a very, very narrow level, what we're doing here in the campus cupboard at Millersville. The cupboard is located in a bigger space that we call the hub, which a lot of the people watching might be familiar with if you've been on campus. And we have a living room, a game room, a cafe, study spaces. So we intentionally put the cupboard right in the middle of all of these community spaces. So it's kind of not weird to stop at the cupboard. It's not like in this hole in the wall somewhere where you feel like, oh, everyone's seeing me go to the food pantry. And I think that does help. Something I've noticed is pretty much every single student who's worked for the pantry, volunteered or been work study, or we've had MSW interns, the vast majority of them are also clients. And so we're seeing that stigma kind of be tempered by the community that we're developing here. We also try to piggyback the food bank with our other activities. So we have free lunch, and it's not a soup kitchen. We just kind of like, hey, we're serving free food, cafe tables. When it was nicer in the fall, because of the pandemic, we served outside in our picnic area, spread everything out. So if you're coming here for a meal, we direct students like, hey, did you know we have the food pantry? On your way out, just check out the cupboard. Or if they come to the cupboard, we tell them, hey, do you have lunch yet today? We're having free lunch down there in the cafe. And as that community develops, I think that does a lot to kind of lessen that sense of stigma, because you learn very quickly, I'm not alone. There's a lot of people in this with me.
That's great. So building community and making it accessible and yeah, and interesting, a place to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I would co-sign with what Ed was saying. What we see around the country is that those schools that are more successful in reducing stigma are doing just that, right? Not hiding the food cupboard down a hall behind, you know, the dumpster in a you know, and it's only open from 2 to 4 on Tuesdays and Fridays, you know, and some of that is because of staffing and capacity, et cetera. But putting them out in the open, normalizing them. Another thing that we've seen, I'm curious if this is happening on Millersville campus at all, but the very simple thing that's faculty can do by putting a syllabus statement, including a basic needs syllabus statement on their syllabi, saying, you know, at the bottom of all the course requirements, you know, a statement saying, if you are, you know, ever in need of XYZ basic needs, here are some resources on campus. Universalizes it, everyone sees it, everyone gets it, not just the ones who have to come forth and ask for help, right? It becomes a part of the culture. And we have some examples of syllabus statements if there are faculty or staff on the call here who are interested in that, if you haven't seen those already. Another thing, you know, there was a young man featured in the film at one point from Drexel. I don't know if you caught that. His name is Evan, and created this group called Sharing Excess, which is on now several campuses. And they do a lot around recovering leftover food, right, from events on campus, conferences and big meetings and stuff like that, and getting it to students who need it. Well, they also do these sort of very fun food giveaways in the middle of the quad there on campus that everyone can come to. And again, it's not stigmatized. They make it fun. They do music, and it's free food. So I think, again, making it fun, making it out in the open, destigmatizes that. And just lastly, on this note, we don't have the data just yet, but we're studying a very interesting thing that's happening at the Dallas Community College in Texas, which is one of the largest community colleges, where they're testing different text nudges to students saying, hey, did you know that this service is available on campus? Did you know that the food cupboard is open today, et cetera, et cetera. And we're trying out different language used in those texts to see what is more destigmatizing than other kinds of text languages around these things. So we're excited to come out with that data soon to share with folks, with colleges, because again, the language that's used when we tell students about these things can either stigmatize or destigmatize them.
Yeah, that's great. Would really like to look at that. Yeah, I think that this is one of those issues, like you said, I think having it fun, open, out in the open, a space, where folks can just pop by, makes it very accessible for everyone. So
I just wanted to add what David had stated about the statement, the syllabus statement. We never did a syllabus statement university-wide, but we had a resource guide that was compiled a few years ago that out of the Office of Diversity and Social Justice, where we compiled resources that are available to our college students, not just academic resources, but what we referred to as well-being resources. And it included the food banks, the hub, right, as a resource to students that was shared with all of our students, all of our faculty, all of our staff, so everyone had access to that information. The other thing, I just want to mention about the destigmatizing, when we think about it, the best way to destigmatize and also to change attitudes and perceptions is to have contact with individuals, right, across groups. And so those in poverty and those not in poverty need to be in contact with one another. So how do we create that contact with each other? And doing things such as what David described as having and hosting these various events so that you're offering, in a fun way, in a non-threatening way, in a destigmatizing way, you're making resources, right, available to individuals, and we can communicate and engage with each other. One of the things that we did in the School of Social Work a couple years ago is we started offering free coffee, tea, and whatever any of the faculty and staff, snacks, treats, whatever we would bring. We have like this community cafe set up in the hall of our floor in our building, and it's free. And faculty, we replenish it, and we also, the leftover food that we might have from events, we put it there, and then we send out a blast email to our students so that if anybody is around, they can come and have access to it. So it's just a way, again, to provide this resource, but in a way that's not calling anybody out or identifying anybody as being in need, but we're creating this sense of community, sense of belonging within our school, and offering this to everybody.
So I was going to piggyback on what Karen said, because I think that something else that we seem to still have a struggle with at a lot of universities is the fact that we don't prepare our staff and faculty to be in support. We don't educate them enough about these real life things that are happening to students. It's the same with mental health, suicide, drugs. I mean, it's these things that are almost taboo to talk about. And so then people look away when you need help because they don't know what to do. And it's easier to look away from you and not encounter you or ask the questions that need to be asked. Because if you do, then, oh my God, what do I do then? And so thank goodness for Ed and for what David are doing, because they're providing spaces. But if faculty and staff aren't educated about those spaces and about what resources are out there, then they're going to keep looking past students who need that support. They don't want to steer them down the wrong path. And so, like, it's so important to make sure you're seeing the students and that you hear them and that you ask. And I'm not saying go up to a student and say, are you hungry? But like, engage in a conversation, notice things, pay attention to the students that we're here to serve. Because, you know, in all honesty, like, food's a human right. We all should have food, accessible, nutritious food that we can get to and sustain us, because it breaks down every other part of your wellness if you don't have that, and creates other issues and challenges. And so it shouldn't be a thing where we look past because we're just scared to engage around it. And I think having conversations with students, like real conversations, that this is a challenge for students in college. And so letting them know that we see all those other issues going on as well, that we realize they're breadwinners in their family, and that, you know, that they're feeling stressed by the cost of college and the debt that's going to be there. That's an issue we got to work on, because, you know, that's part of the problem. You know, when they graduate, it's going to be like a continuing cycle, because now they're going to go out into the world and they're going to get a job, and it's probably not going to be enough to pay the debt that they owe. And then they're going to try it again, continue to help their families, and they're going to be food insecure again, and God forbid, homeless on top of it. And so, like, if we don't get at it soon, we're just going to continue to create a cycle that follows them all the way down the path.
That's a really good point. I hope that you can hear me. I'm not sure. My internet is unstable, unfortunately, but bump me out, but I'm back, I think. Can you hear me? Are we good? No? Yes? Okay, thanks. I could see a couple of heads, a couple of my panelists' heads. Yeah, Jan, I mean, to your point, you know, ask the question, providing a space for that. I've done this for a lot, and some of my colleagues are starting to do it now too, is doing these individual meetings with all my students in my class. It's just the 15 minutes of fame, right? You set up a time, we sit down, say to you, like, how's it going? Especially with teaching online now, are you able to manage this? And you open up that door, and, you know, I'm not digging into their personal life, but I'm offering at least the opportunity. And I feel really, you know, really grateful that a lot of them will share, well, I could really use this. And so, and to Karen's point, like, we always post on our D2L shells, all of those lists. And there's a link, of course, to the Millersville website for all those resources. And oftentimes it's students just don't know. This is new territory for them, and they don't know. So I really appreciated that link that we could kind of send them to. So I wanted to, invite everybody. Some people have been putting some comments in the chat. If you have questions, you could put those in the chat as well, as we're going along, and then we'll kind of address those in a few minutes. So one of my questions was, you know, how can we offer affordable and wholesome food service? You know, moving into the solution part now, how can we offer it to our community, and who's responsible to take up that work? I mean, David talked about, well, in the Drexel example, you know, that's an excellent example of the community, or the college community, right? Kind of making it a place for them to gather this food that's extra around the community. I mean, we live in Lancaster County, for heaven's sakes, you know, I mean, we grow a lot of food here in this county. So.
Oh, go ahead, David.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Jan made a comment that made me, I want to build off of. She mentioned how this is a human rights issue, and I agree 100% that it is a human rights issue. And if we look at it that way, then that means, right, our society, our government is responsible for for this. So that's just an easy blanket statement that one can make, but in reality, we know that is a long-term solution, right? So when we think about solutions, you have like the downstream solutions, such as what Ed's doing at the hub, which provides our students, right, with the immediate access to what they need, the food at the pantry and the meals that are offered there throughout the week. And so those are like those immediate resources, immediate needs, solutions to the challenge that of food insecurity. But then we need to have these upstream solutions, right, that address the problem at its source. And so we have to think about what's at the source, right? And we all talked about some of the challenge or some of the causes of food insecurity. And I'm part of the Governor Wolf's poverty reduction action team, and I co-chair that. And that's part of what we're looking at are some of these upstream solutions to addressing poverty in general across the Commonwealth. But part of that includes the manifestations, right, of poverty, which food insecurity is one of those. And so we're identifying what it is that can help mitigate some of the challenges that our college students are experiencing. So is that making sure that they have access to other resources that they wouldn't necessarily need to pay for, that then they could have the extra expense to pay for, or extra funds to pay for the meals. So one of the items that we're thinking of doing is ways to reduce the cost of education, because we know that education has continued to increase. And as the documentary highlighted, because of the increases in education, we're seeing more students needing to work. And the documentary mentioned part-time. I would say many of our students, particularly at Millersville, aren't working part-time, they're working full-time. So they're going to school full-time, they're going to, and they're working part-time or full-time. And so it becomes challenging to meet those needs. So how can we reduce the cost of education? And those are some of the upstream solutions, right, that can help to reduce the challenge and address food insecurity. But again, those are long-term solutions. We definitely need some of these, more immediate, more downstream solutions that Ed's program provides.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's good to know that work is happening and that you're a part of it, Karen. I'm glad about that too. So,
Miriam, I'd just like to add, in answering your original question of whose responsibility is it, it's all of our responsibility. And I think sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking the one guy on Pennsylvania Avenue, it's his job, or maybe it's the 538 members of Congress, or maybe it's Governor Wolf's job. If we want a healthier country, we need a healthier state. If we want a healthier state, we need healthier counties. We need a healthier county, you're going to need healthy communities. And who's the members of the community? So I think sometimes, though, we need to have the macro perspective of, definitely legislative policy is important. Someone's got to do that work. But at the end of the day, I need to own my campus. If you're a faculty member, you're a staff, administration, community member living around here, student, business owner, landlord, all of us are stakeholders here in Millersville, and we all have a responsibility to do what we can. So at some point, it has to get down to us and doing what we can. And that's going to require some hard conversations, maybe for certain stakeholders. I mean, landlords are going to need to realize that if their students get pushed too far and have to choose between rent, food, or tuition, I know students who are choosing to pay the rent over food because the landlord will, you don't want to be late on your rent. Well, at some point, that student's just going to drop out, go home, and then you're not going to get any rent. So there's an incentive for all of us as stakeholders to work together to solve this problem.
good point. Good point.
100%, Ed, 100%.
I would just in response to your question, Miriam, I think there are, again, there are and we have the privilege or the benefit at Hope Center, since we work with colleges around the country, we could see lots of different things that are being tried and what seems to be working and what doesn't seem to be working. And so we're fortunate to have that, 30,000-foot view. I'll throw out a few things and I can put them in the chat if you want to follow up with them later, but there are lots of very interesting things happening around the country that you may want to think about if you haven't already at Millersville. You mentioned, being in Lancaster County and being so close, right, to food production. There was a group that was created by students out of Stanford in California called Farm Link, and I think they actually now are working nationally, where they, and particularly last year, right, when farmers were producing things that weren't going to market, right, they were destroying things that they were producing because they couldn't get, say, because no schools had school lunch programs for a year, that kind of thing. They figured out a way to connect with farmers who had surplus food and get them to food banks, to schools, et cetera, et cetera. Started by students. I'm sure if that's not already happening in your area, that is something, to look into. There's this other interesting organization called Good Food Purchasing. And they actually work with institutions like colleges to do sort of an audit of their their food service program in terms of, is it sustainable? Is it affordable? Is it healthy? Are the workers treated well who serve that food in the campus, et cetera? And they do really interesting work with colleges to figure out how to improve their food service situation from different angles. Good Food Purchasing. There are some interesting things I put in the chat. University of Kentucky is doing very interesting things around food. They created this $1 meal cafe, which, it sounds like with the free lunches that you all do, it's, maybe just taking it one step further. And that's a non-stigmatizing thing because anyone can come and get the $1 meal, whether you're a student, faculty, whoever. And that's just something to look into. So there are all kinds of interesting and creative things that I think can be done to increase affordability and healthy food. And I think if we talk a little bit more about SNAP, again, that was mentioned in the film. I think that right now, particularly because there's been an expansion of eligibility for SNAP for students in particular. I think it's something we really need to take advantage of now for students.
I want to just build off of what David said about SNAP, because I think there are many things, and Millersville, and I haven't highlighted some of the things that Millersville has been doing. I don't want people to think that we aren't doing some of those immediate solutions. So I will take a moment, and my colleague, Dr. Jen Frank, has really spearheaded a lot of this, and she works closely with Ed and many of our students. And I will say a lot of this is student initiated, as David stated. Many of these ideas come from students. And so years ago, we had a student that was very frustrated and appalled at the amount of food that gets thrown away on our campus. And so that led to a student organization that's now called the Food Recovery Network. And my colleague is the faculty advisor and works with, it's one particular place on our campus where they recovered the food, at one point in time in order to avoid that waste. And so that's one initiative that was launched on our campus. Other initiatives, of course, is the expanding collaboration with Ed. And I do know that they work to get fresh food at the cupboard, at the pantry, so that students do have access to nutritious food as well. We also did a community garden on a couple occasions, and that allowed us we got a small grant, and over the summer we worked again with another student who tended the garden, and it allowed us to take that food and give it to Ed at the pantry so that it could be passed on to our students. Another thing that was done was something called Swipe Out Hunger, which is where students who had extra meals on their meal plan could donate it to other students. And then those unused meals were distributed by our director of our financial aid office, so that if a student was in need of a meal, they could get a pass from our financial aid director in order to have a meal while on campus. So there have been some initiatives. One of the things I do want to highlight, and I think that we at the university need to do a much better job of this, and we were moving in that direction prior to the pandemic, and just some other challenges, but I'm hoping that this will come to fruition and we'll be able to maximize the use of the program that we started with one of our Center for Health Education. And it's a wellness advocate. So again, one of our master's social work students serves as a wellness advocate, and it's basically an alternative name for a case manager. But it's to do many of the services that were highlighted in this documentary, that our students are in need of services in order to be successful in college. And so they might have challenges like the students that were highlighted in this documentary, but don't know how to access those resources. And a case manager can help those individuals access those resources. And so that was the role and the purpose of this wellness advocate that we launched in collaboration with our Center for Health Education and Promotion. It's just with the pandemic, it has not been fully utilized and maximized, but this individual helped during the pandemic getting our students signed up for unemployment and getting that the stimulus check. I mean, that individual spent most of his time doing just that, getting students connected with SNAP, exactly what you said, David. And so I just think that this is an opportunity that we have to provide resources to our students, educate our students about what is available to them.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing all of those. And thank you for those of you who are putting some good ideas in the chat as well. Thank you for the resources. David, you've been popping some things in there too. I appreciate it. I just want to invite everybody to ask your questions in there or put in other resources. I do want to note that Scott Helfrich said that revenues from on-campus housing, this goes back to our housing conversation, contribute over $900,000 annually for direct scholarships to students to help pay for on-campus housing costs. So that's another avenue, right? Because we say everything's connected. So if students have to choose what they need to put their money towards, maybe that can help. And I liked another comment, we can have this conversation when students come to orientation. How do faculty talk about these services that are available to students? Can advisors speak to this? And yeah, as Ed said, own your own campus. Yeah. Yeah, how do we really have this sense of community, right? This community of care where we can all be supporting one another, I think is really important. So I want to definitely turn, Karen got us started to think about some solutions. The film got us to think about some possible solutions. And I want to offer the panel an opportunity and other folks to put in the chat too. What should we be doing? And the one thing I did want to say too, I guess before we get into that, is that I just read this week that it came out from Millersville administration about the way that we're going to keep our present vendors for our dining hall services. And I really don't know much about that. I don't know who's involved in that decision making or anything, but I didn't know if anybody had any comments about that first. And then as opposed to going to one outside vendor to bring food in, we're going to keep doing things on campus is the way I understand it. Does anyone have any other insights into that?
I don't, other than the fact that I love our dining services.
Yeah. Well, it made me think of in the film where they talked about how like Aramark or some big company like that is donating lots of money to campuses because that's a really lucrative position for them to be in, so I don't know how all the numbers crunch out of that, but that's okay. I'm looking at the chat here. Oh, okay. This is a good point, that sometimes students feel they aren't needy enough to go to food pantries, that someone else needs it more than they do. And yeah, that's addressing some stigma there too. Absolutely. Yeah, so part of that could be, students learning how to advocate for themselves. I'm try to push that a lot. I think that covers a lot of different areas. So any other solutions? Can we think outside of the box a little bit? What else can we be doing to take down these barriers and to really make systemic change, and that will impact all of us in our community?
There's something that we've been talking a lot about at the Hope Center, and I think there's this slowly growing conversation in the country around extending. Seems like a long shot, but it feels more realistic now than a few years ago. The idea of extending the National School Lunch Program, right, which is now, free to or almost free to every student in a public school up till senior year. The question of why is it that we stop there, right? The question of why do we think that a student who is 18 and still in high school, but versus 18 in 5 months and now at a college, no longer has the same need for a free or reduced lunch support. So, there's a growing, small but growing movement in the country to at least begin to think about that for community colleges, right, as a first step, extending the National School Lunch Free and Reduced Lunch program. And, that's the sort of big thinking that could, make a huge dent in this problem. I'm curious what people think about that, actually.
Mhm.
I just wrote it down, David, taking it back to the governor's action team. I think it's an excellent solution. And those are the types of upstream solutions that you need if you want to, make impact that's going to be sustainable.
So something I think would really help here at Millersville, and I mean, this would translate, of course, is a holistic approach to mentoring. It seems like our entire mentoring advisement, and again, I'm the outsider here, so Jan and Karen, you would have more insight into this, but it seems like the process of advising, counseling, mentoring students is very fragmented, and you have faculty members who advise you on your major and course selection and all that, or career path or internships. And then if you're having mental health issues, you go to the counseling center. If you get in trouble, you go to student conduct and community standards. But I can't identify where is the comprehensive place where you're going to find someone who's going to look at where you're living, if you're renting, your financial management, budgeting, nutrition. And it seems to me that if we expect all that to be covered here at Millersville through CHEP and what Ari's doing, I think we're nuts. One department, and Ari does a great job with the Center for Health Education and Promotion, but one grad assistant wellness advocate for 7,000 students, that's not going to cut it. So somehow a holistic approach to mentoring, where we're not just concerned that you get your credits and you pay your bill and you get out of here, but we want to make sure you're healthy in the process. We want to make sure that if you make the decision to move out of the residence halls, that you're doing that for a good reason, and have you thought of all the costs associated with that? So I don't know what that looks like. I know it's messy, but I think that's something that would help students to have a holistic mentoring approach. And I think we could pull some of those stakeholders together if we expanded. Now, again, it gets messy, but we could tap into so many local businessmen, alumni, community members. There's a ton of people here who would serve as a mentor, and we could make sure the university, there's a process to vet these people, clearances and all that kind of stuff. There's tons of people who would love to step in, get trained, and take a handful of students and just walk with them for 4 years. Not with an agenda of, oh, I want you to graduate with this major, or I want you to pay your tuition on time, but I want you to be healthy.
I love that idea, Ed. So I do a lot of mentoring on campus, and that just really resonates with me. And I agree with you. I think there are a lot of people in the community now who would be willing to step up and do that. And yeah, and we used to have something similar to that a couple of years ago, the Millersville Mentoring Alliance program. We had alumni and we had other folks in the community that would walk with students through their journey. And it was really kind of wonderful, you know, to see that. And a lot of alumni come back and they want to do that and help out. And I do know that Dr. Wuba, one of his big pushes for this upcoming year is to really roll out more mentoring. So I think that and that's the hope, right? We have mentors for incoming freshmen now. So we're going to kind of keep rotating and building that into the whole community at this point. But that's a great idea.
And I would add, if anybody wants a model of what that could look like at Millersville, I'd recommend they talk to Darlene Newman with SAS, Student Access and Support Services, because the approach they take with the pre-scholars program is very much integrated. Before the pandemic, students were hanging out, having lunch over there. I know that Dar and her crew have bought, they buy lunch for students a lot. They study together, they have study halls. They talk about, you know, relational issues. So Darlene has a very holistic approach in making sure her pre-scholars are being successful. And if you look at the stats, DAR's program has a higher retention rate than the university at large. So I'm just saying, there are examples out there where this is working if we were to embrace a holistic mentoring approach.
Yeah, and I also want to give a shout out because one of my colleagues is in the audience. You know, Scott Helfrich, who's the director of our housing and residential programs, you know, he really brought the living learning communities back to Millersville and made them holistic in meeting the needs of the students, the learning needs, but also those social, emotional, what I call the well-being needs. And I would say that within the living learning communities, because you have faculty who serve as advisors to the students who are members of that living learning community, it allows for that type of mentoring that you're describing, Ed. And so it's not just, we're not serving as their academic advisors, but we're there as their mentors to guide them through their, you know, academic career and to provide them with resources that they might need to help overcome whatever obstacles they might experience. And it could be, you know, financial obstacles. It could be food, you know, obstacles, security obstacles. It could be social obstacles, you know, interpersonal relationship obstacles, right? But that mentoring piece is, I think it's present within at least the living learning communities. And so I do want to give a shout out to my colleague who has really grown that at Millersville. And I think, you know, we're collecting data as part of that. And it, you know, it shows the students feel connected to Millersville. When they feel connected to Millersville and to their faculty and to their peers, right, the outcomes are better.
Yes, great. Thank you. So I want to invite folks, if you haven't, I see a lot of comments in there. If you have questions, any questions for the panel, please put them in the chat. And while we're kind of waiting on that, I just want to have each of the panelists, if there's something else that we didn't cover right now, you know, tonight that you wanted to make sure that you can share with us, I just want to give you that space to do that. So anything that you want to continue to talk about or you want to make sure that we get in the conversation.
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but in case anybody was wondering, we did a survey on campus of our students, and we surveyed all of our students, undergrad and graduate students, a few years ago, about 3 years ago now. And we assessed food insecurity, we assessed housing insecurity, homelessness, and well-being factors. So there are 5 areas of well-being. My colleague and I, Dr. Jen Frank, and I did this study. And just to give you an idea of the level of food insecurity at Millersville, at that time, we had 36% of our students reporting being low or very low food insecure, which is, double the national average. So it's pretty high, and we're thankful that we have supports in the community with Ed being right on our campus, really helping us. We're thankful with our student services. Tom Richardson has been extremely supportive of helping us identify those resources. I mean, he was a support. Renardo Hall has been a great support with helping us get resources in place to meet our student needs. So they have been responsive to the challenges that, the data, they're using the data to inform some decision making. So I'm very appreciative.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So we have a question in the chat. Have you seen any differences in those students who simply do not want to take out more debt and are food insecure because of it versus those who cannot receive any more aid because of their status, timing out, I guess?
That's a really interesting question from a research standpoint from our end. I don't know the answer to that. I would have to check with my colleagues who do the direct survey research if we have ever looked at that or can tease that out of the numbers. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm curious if you all have firsthand knowledge of that.
Yeah, I know the data we collect, we do collect data about, income and student debt and whether they receive financial aid or not, but we wouldn't be able to flesh this out with the data that we have.
David, I think they mentioned in the film about how hard it is to get a sustainable wage without a college education. I find here at the cupboard, the vast majority of our clients are current students, but we have students who've had to take a semester or 2 off because of financial reasons, and they keep coming and we let them come. We don't restrict them from coming. So even if, and again, I may not be interpreting the question totally, but correctly, but if you have to stop and you don't get your degree, and even if you get a full-time job, you're likely not making a lot of money, and you likely still could use some help. So I think it's unfortunate that students do have to stop their education because they can't pay their tuition, and they're still going to suffer with some degree of food insecurity until they land a decent job. But what kind of decent job can you get without a college education? It's tough. So it's kind of this like cycle, chicken and the egg, which comes first, And so that leads to students making some really tough decisions to take out another loan, yet another loan, to pile on more debt because they're trying to complete that degree to get the job that's going to let them buy the food that they need. And so it becomes a vicious cycle. So I do run into students who seem to have paused their education, and they seem to be in just as much need as the students who are going to school.
I've had the same situation. I've known some students who are in that same situation, and it is so hard to pull them back then after that experience, right? It's like, well, okay, I'm making enough money now to survive and I can kind of go here. So David, did you have a comment?
Just to, it's a rhetorical question, right? Is even if more debt were possible, more loans were possible, right? Is that what we want, right? For students to meet basic needs? Probably not, right? That probably should not be the answer, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Tom. He put some mentorship opportunities, the link for that in the chat too. So I'm going to draw your attention to that. Appreciate it. So I know that we have the Education and Poverty Conference usually in October at Millersville. We're going on our 5th year, I guess, coming up. And we had a speaker there talking about share meals. Someone put in there, swipe out hunger was mentioned. Yeah, that was David. Thank you. Sharemeals.org. They have a whole system up where it's kind of like share your swipes at the end of the semester or the end of the year for students. So I think there are, there are things that we can be, things that we are, and things that we can be doing. And I always Karen, to focus on the solutions and, let's get some energy behind it and really make it happen. And I guess the one thing I think, going back to what Jan said, is just really talking to students too. Collecting the surveys is really important. We get kind of that big picture, but talking about this movie is so powerful because we hear the stories. And I think people are motivated then to action when you hear someone's real life story.
One of the other things, Miriam, that I think we can do, when we think about solutions, are there other things that you can do to reduce or eliminate costs that might allow students, that reduces the stress and the barriers, right? Are there other areas besides having a food pantry, right? What other ways can we reduce barriers for students, especially educational barriers? And so I think of, where open access resources, open educational resources. As a faculty person, can I eliminate the cost of textbooks? If I have to have a textbook, what can we do? So I can, I can say within the School of Social Work, we have all of our textbooks, required textbooks that students have access to. They wouldn't even have to purchase any of the required textbooks. We try really hard to either not use a textbook. Many of us are going to open educational resources, or we're using a collection, a combination of book chapters and articles instead of text. Or we have a lending library within our school where courses that have required textbooks so that students could borrow them. And, at the hub, we also, someone mentioned at Miriam, I think you mentioned earlier, you're taking clothing. We started, we launched the professional clothing closet because, again, it's another expense. I remember when I graduated from college and I got my first real job, right? I needed professional clothing and I couldn't afford to purchase an entire wardrobe. So our students are in need of professional clothing often before they graduate because they are doing internships, required internships and field placements. And so we started this professional clothing closet. And again, I'm going to give another shout out to our colleagues on campus. We got a small grant from Student Services Inc., who gave us some money in order to have some additional funds for students who need something that we might not have at the clothing closet for them. So I want us, try to think beyond the food options that might be available, and how can we reduce some of the other costs, the other expenses that students are experiencing.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Miriam, this is Tom Richardson.
Yeah, hi.
So this is really good discussion. I really appreciate that. I think one of the other things that was very significant over the last year or so is that the university made a commitment to raising the minimum wage on campus from that of a minimum wage to $7.25 to $9. Now, I have two teenagers that live at home and one that's got a foot in our house and then a foot elsewhere. And I know that they can make more than $9 an hour, but that $1.75 minimum increase was significant to many. And I applaud the decision for doing that, even though as someone that oversees multiple areas that has auxiliary budgets that we needed to address, I still think that was very student-centered to be a little bit more competitive. And again, while I understand that students could still go to certain areas off campus to make a few dollars more, that did see a difference in trying to keep people on campus for employment, which from my perspective, we see there's a greater benefit in terms of flexibility, a better understanding of college students' schedule and all that. So that I absolutely am not saying that was the silver bullet, but it certainly was a significant increase to the paycheck for our students.
Mhm. Well, it's kind of like the gesture. Thank you, Tom. It's kind of like the gesture that says, we see you, right? And we can do this. We want to do this to validate your worth, at least your job worth, so. Yeah, and
can I add to that, Miriam, because
Mhm.
Tom made me think of something, and this might be, I'm going to challenge maybe others who might be on attending this documentary screening tonight and be in a position where you are supervising any of our students. So Tom mentioned how the university has raised the minimum wage right on our campus. Many of our students are required to complete an internship or a placement as part of their education. And the documentary highlighted, and we just shared, that many of our students are needing to work part-time, if not full-time, in order to survive. And so when you require them to complete an internship or a field placement on top of attending school full-time and on top of working full-time, that is almost impossible. And so what we have been really trying to do is to encourage and to advocate for paid internships. So people we collaborate with, we're beginning that conversation early on at the beginning. Our field director does a phenomenal job. So I'm going to shout out to Heather Stroman, who has been doing a phenomenal job with having those conversations with our field organizations, our field agencies, that so that they understand our students, right, and the needs of our students, and to encourage them, is there any way that they could offer, even if they can't pay the wages, all of the wages, are there other incentives that they might provide? Like, for example, we have some that are in downtown Lancaster, and so they cover the cost of parking. So that's not an additional expense to our student. So having that, I think that it's important for those of us who are utilizing students right within our agencies, that this goes back to Ed's comment where it's everybody's responsibility. So I also think if we're going to be utilizing the services of students, yes, you're helping educate the student, but the student is giving something in return to your agency. So how can you support them and their needs?
Yeah, that's that whole village idea, right? The community kind of working together and the trade-offs that we can do. I like that idea. I didn't even think about that, parking as an extra fee for folks. Great. Anything else? Anybody else wants to share? You want to make sure you get in? David?
Sure. One thing I would say, I don't think it came up tonight, and Dr. Rice, you might be particularly interested in this because you reminded us of your position with the state commission. There are 3 or 4 states that have passed something called hunger-free campus legislation. Started with California, New Jersey has it, and it's been introduced in Minnesota and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. And what it would do, it would create a grant program for public colleges, so all the community colleges and the PASHE system and the state related, to access funds, state funds, if they meet certain criteria showing that they are, doing everything they can do with current resources to become a hunger-free campus. And from what I'm hearing tonight, all the things that you all are doing, I'm sure Millersville would qualify. So it's a pending bill. It's called the Hunger Free Campus legislation introduced by Rep. O'Malley, who I think is Delaware County, and Rep. Kenyatta from Philadelphia. And, you know, it's a potential policy piece of the puzzle to help colleges have more resources to deal with these issues on campus. So something to think about. And there's a great, I don't think you all have a chapter on your campus. It's called Holla for Hunger. It's a student-led group. And they are doing a big campaign around this proposed policy. And if you're interested, I just put the link in the chat there, and that's a student-led group doing work on that piece.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, and I do believe that Shayna mentioned that she is going to send the chat out for those of you who need some of these links, or you can copy them right now or click on them right now, but we really appreciate that, all the resources there. So I would just really like to thank, I mean, this has been very interesting. I've learned a lot, and I'm motivated to kind of see some of these things happen, or really put my time and effort behind some of this, because it's such an important issue. So I want to thank Karen and Jan and David and Ed for your time tonight. You've been wonderful. I appreciate your flexibility and your insights. And I want to thank all of you who spent your, 3 hours or whatever with us this evening, coming here and kind of looking at this particular issue. So I'm going to turn it over to Shayna then.
Yes.
Round of applause. You can do little emoticons for round of applause for our panelists.
Yes, a huge thank you to everyone who made this event possible. I am sending a survey into the chat. We just would love to hear from you. It's also great to see some names that have come to events regularly. We'd love to hear your feedback on how to make it better. We also have our next event is coming up on the 24th. It's a webinar that's looking at access to childcare. So you talk about how there's lots of things that are interconnected and related. So we will be looking at childcare more specifically, which will be another great conversation to have, and we hope you join us. And then, like Miriam mentioned, I will be collecting all the resources and sending a follow-up email. And so, yeah, hopefully you'll have everything you need to go out and then start making changes and using the knowledge that you've now learned. But thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Yeah. Good night. Thank you.
Thanks all. Appreciate it.
Everyone.
Stop my recording.